Yesterday, I combined two of my favorite things, artificial intelligence and rock climbing, and not only was I incredibly impressed by GPT-o3, but for the first time in my life, I began to feel the AGI. So let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So today I want to talk about rock climbing and artificial intelligence. You wouldn't think those two things would go together, which is why I was not only incredibly impressed by what OpenAI's ChatGPT-o3 did, but I began to actually see where we could be, start to think of this as artificial general intelligence rather than just artificial intelligence. So I'm going to start with this, and I'm going to show you just how vague these prompts are. I mean, you can see it right here. I'm 5 feet 10 inches tall. Help me figure out how to climb the pictured orange route. So this is something I just wanted to see how O3 would think, and it was remarkably impressive, and also kind of like a 1980s movie because it literally has zoom and enhance in it, which is pretty cool. So anyway, we'll talk about this. Anyway, I have 3 routes that I was working on at the gym yesterday. This was Easter Sunday, and happy Easter to all who celebrate it, by the way. But anyway, I'm working on 3 routes, none of which I have actually successfully gotten. And I was like, well, hell, let's just see what it has to say about beta for these things. So I'm going to blow this picture up for a second. The orange route here starts with the double tape. This is the arm. This is where your hands would go. This is where your feet would start. And then you have to move over here, up to here, and up to here. It's pretty challenging. So anyway, and this is kind of a sloper. This is actually a dihedral. You'll see a couple of mistakes that O3 makes in terms of interpreting the picture. And the first time it didn't really understand that the route was actually all of the orange holds. Every gym has a different sort of methodology. Some of them have same colored tape and stuff. So it made some mistakes in terms of interpreting it. I corrected it and it did a better job. So I want to point that out. That's not the fault of this. This would be like a new human coming to this gym might not understand the specifics of how a route would work. But anyway, it was able to look at this without any height reference markers or anything like that. I assume using the size of the holds as an idea of how far apart they were. And ChatGPT used tools to get in and look at these individual things and then created a plan for me and in a text format told me how I should climb this. Now, that is very, very challenging. Usually when you ask somebody about beta is information, if in climbing terminology. If you ask somebody for beta about how to climb something, they will kind of demonstrate to you or they'll point to it and go like this, they'll move their body around. It's challenging to say this in a text format. But anyway, I thought ChatGPT did a remarkable job. I didn't finish any of these, but it gave me good advice for that. These are all at the limits of my ability. But anyway, mostly I really wanted to look at the thought process more than the final output because that is what's fascinating to me. So I'm going to kind of open up the analysis and look at this thing and see how it thought about this. So you can see it thought for 2 minutes. So that's a pretty long time. So it says quick orientation, all the orange holds with white tape belong to this problem. So that was the mistake it made because it didn't understand. And I correct this in the next version. I said, hey, by the way, it's only the orange holds that you should be looking at, and then it was able to make better, information. But I want to look at the first reasoning that it did before I gave it any more instructions. So anyway, it starts on the low blue slab, moves up the blue-gray arete. That again is climber terminology. It's actually backwards of that. It's a dihedral because the angle is actually closed less than 90 degrees rather than greater than 90 degrees. I could see how you could make a mistake with this image that it might look like it was an arete, but it's actually a dihedral, which means it's inwards. So you can actually stem out with your feet and you can touch both of these. So anyway, it made a mistake about that. But again, just looking at a picture, it's a reasonable mistake to make. Anyway, our feet follow. Only the orange pieces are guaranteed to be in, but the setter has left plenty of screw holes and textured paint you can smear on. There is not textured paint. Active climbing is famous for not having textured paint. There is no sand or grit in the paint. It is incredibly smooth, which makes it much more challenging to climb these things than most gyms have. So anyway, but reasonable mistakes that it would make from just looking at the pictures. So anyway, at 5 foot 10, you can keep the sequence static. Nothing forces a jump. That is actually correct. So anyway, you can see here that it had an output and it says where to start, what to do. And this was, again, a mistake because it didn't understand exactly how the route worked. But more importantly, I want to break down what it thought about. So look at what it did here. It looked at the image, right? And it says, I'll focus on mapping out the sequence of moves based on the holds arrangement in the image. I'll examine the holds using the image closely and describe the sequence of moves. So like I said, zoom and enhance. It actually blows up individual images. And it actually does this via Python code. It's using tools. It's very cool. I'll examine the holds using the image closely and describe the sequence of moves with the goal of helping pinpoint starting holds, transitions, and important beta. So anyway, you can see how it analyzes the image and then it begins to blow it up. And it says, I need to consider details. Starting holds seem to include large orange hold at the bottom left. So again, I gave it no instructions about this at all, but it began to figure this out. Then it said, I'm zooming in on the area with the mid orange hold. So it actually begins to zoom in on pieces of the image to be able to get a sense of, how one would climb this thing and get a better sense of what these holds are like. And then you can see the start tape is located at the bottom left with 2 strips and a grade tag. It looks like the first orange hold is a large vertical one. White tape leads to these holds, which might indicate a grade, possibly VB. That is not correct. It's actually rated as a 3. Anyway, I think that's sandbag because that's actually a pretty hard route. Anyway, there are more white strips showing the progression of the route. That's where it made a mistake. This is incorrect because it's only the orange holds. Anyway, this is more about its thought process rather than whether it was exactly correct or not. Anyway, so it made a mistake and it thought about the yellow holds and things like that, but it is, working its way through this and starting to figure out how to work on all of this stuff. Then it goes back out to a kind of generalized view. And so note it's beginning here in this highlighted section to figure out how the climb would go. You'd start on the left of this image, move to the right. Again, it thinks it's an arête or something that's sticking out is actually sticking in. Again, if you look at this picture, you can easily see how you could invert that. It could look like it was sticking out rather than sticking in. And of course, I could have told it was a dihedral instead of an arête, so it would have better knowledge. But again, it's more about the way it's thinking about this stuff than what actually comes out, because beta is also very, very user specific. So even if, I asked somebody else, they would give me their beta and it might not work for me. So anyway, it's all about the way this thing is thinking about this. And in my mind, it's thinking about it in just the right way. It's very cool. And also notice that it begins to sort of structure this out by doing like hashtag A, hashtag 1, hashtag 2. It's thinking about the holds in terms of like start holds and then hold 1, hold 2, etc., which is really, really cool. And then you can see it start to go off the rails here because it sees gray holds and things like that. That's not part of the route. That would make it very, very easy. So anyway, it gets mistaken and it kind of goes off the rails about this. But again, even while it's going off the rails, notice that it's thinking about this for a 5'10" climber. And that really matters. If I was 6'5" or something, the beta for this would be very different than if I was 5 feet tall versus 5'10". Height makes a ton of difference for climbing. And also notice here that it zooms in and it looks at this and says it thinks it's being a grade of 3 or 4. There is an argument going on between people. Some people say it's a grade 4, other people say it's a 3. Somebody put a 4 exclamation mark. That's part of the gym's sort of vibe, is that the people who route set, they put up a grade. So you notice that there's a 4 with a circle in it. Somebody else put a 3 there. In other words, as a user, you can climb it and you can put your own grade down. And then somebody else put a 4 exclamation mark. I have not finished the climb yet, so I don't want to grade it myself, but I feel like more like it's a 4 than a 3. But anyway, so it was able to pinpoint that and realize that this is a suggested 3 or 4 climb. But anyway, the output of all of this is we get the orange holds with the white tape belong to this problem. That is an incorrect assumption about this. But again, reasonable based on other climbing gyms and stuff. So I had to give it a suggestion. Then it gives me move by move beta, which is incorrect because of that. And it actually gives me extra tips on how to climb this. So I think that's great. Compression is king, which is really, really fun. Straight arms, active feet. I mean, that's classic climbing technique. You want to keep your arms very straight because doing this is extremely exhausting to hold your arms that way. So anyway, I gave it more instructions. I said actually only the orange holds are on, nothing else. Double white tape indicates start for hands. The single white tape to hold at the top is the finish for both hands. See if you can refine your beta. So notice it goes back through this and it blows up the pictures and things like that again. And look at the way it thinks about this. The route has 5 or 6 orange holds. Let's see. The starting holds might involve a long vertical rail on the left with some tape near a blue section under a large curved rail. I'll revise the sequence steps more clearly so that it thinks about it. And again, it's kind of like it thought for 16 seconds to start here, and then it thinks for another 31 seconds here. So it actually like thinks in pieces, which is really cool. And I love the fact that O3 is able to do this. And then I don't know quite why this was not messed up on my phone, but it's messed up on the computer here because obviously I was using my phone. I didn't have my laptop with me. So I'm not exactly sure why I kind of overwrote this, but it's basically like figuring out where to go. And then it comes up with what I think is a reasonable sequence of moves to attempt to climb this thing. And it says key body cues for this, feet, orange only, and then hands. And so it's basically numbered this. So 0 is the setup, the start, and then it moves from 1 through 6 to the finish. So very, very cool. Again, this is bouldering. I'm not using a rope or anything like that. You fall off if you fall off. It's not that tall. It's only about, 10 or 12 feet high. So basically you climb to the bottom to the top. If you fall off, you fall on a mat. And then note that it gives height specific pointers and micro beta tricks. So a lot of interesting stuff. Anyway, I want to move on to this next climb here because it does something different. It actually uses tools tools. It uses code to begin to analyze this image. So I asked it how to climb this yellow route here that starts way down here in the bottom right and moves up to the top left. So, okay, help me climb this yellow one that starts in the cave and ends near me. Notice I'm still part of the same conversation. I did not give it more information about or repeat the information about how it has to use only yellow holds, but it was able to figure that out because, I had told it that previously. So anyway, it thinks about this for 4 seconds and it says, to help with the yellow route, starts in the cave area, ends near the climber. So that's towards me. The image shows parts of the gym and we're looking for yellow holds with white tape. Single tape usually means the top, double tape indicates the start. So again, it remembered from the last piece of the conversation. On the right side near the cave area are yellow holds with tape. In the cave, I spot a yellow jug under the roof, which is true. That's a very, very large one, but not that easy. I have not finished this. I've gotten to about here, if you want to look at it, and then I fall off because of the angle of things. It's very difficult. Anyway, so you can see that it begins to figure this stuff out. It then starts to map it. And again, I don't know. Yeah. So here, I don't again know why this is on top of it. It wasn't on top of itself on the phone, but somehow it's just a web browser thing. But look at what it did. It actually creates a little Python thing from PIL import image, and then it opens the image up and it actually prints the image size, and then it begins to break it apart. It captions off these things. So actually, since I'm getting so many errors, I'm just going to start over with a whole new conversation here just so it works fresh and we'll be able to watch it go. So hopefully it will do the same things more or less. Anyway, I just basically told it a little bit more information just to make sure it wouldn't make any mistakes with this. So let's let ChatGPT think about this and we will expand the reasoning. Hopefully we will see this tool usage actually go on live. It's very cool. As it started to do that on my phone, it was small and I was trying to look, but I was like, wow, this is super cool. So anyway, it begins to analyze the climbing route, need to describe the beta for the yellow route, the starting position. So it's basically just, rehashing what I told it. So now it's going to go into analyzing the image. Let's see if I can expand this. Here we go. So yeah, let's zoom in on the bottom right to double check the starting holds, analyzing image. Unfortunately, it's not using the same tools that it was yesterday, as far as I can tell. There was little code snippets. You could see a little like arrow there, and I'm hoping that it will actually do that. It seems to be taking a different route this time. So if not, I can flip back to the other conversation and show you some of that, but you could see a little bit of it. It was using PIL, but basically you can see it thinking about this. It's like, since the user provided an image, we should focus on describing the yellow holds and movement sequence, starting with the yellow in-cut jug under the roof in the cave. Sorry, it just jumped on me. Feat should also use yellow holds. In the cave area, there's a yellow foothold, undercling, and a dot hold beneath the starting position. I'll need to be mindful of describing both hand and foot placement, adding to rules, right? So again, it's thinking about this all very carefully. And then it kind of goes in here and begins to chop the image apart. I'm again not sure why this time it decided not to use the Python tools, but it's obviously able to crop in and zoom in on individual parts of the climb, and it's sort of breaking it up. It's like, okay, I'm going to look at this part. I'm going to look at this part. Note here that it says that there are blue holds, but those are off route, which is correct. So you're only allowed to use the yellow. And also note that as it crops in the image, it says the route uses only yellow holds, and there's a yellow foothold near the floor that's not visible in the current image, which is correct. It's over here somewhere. So really interesting how it's talking to itself. It's like it breaks it apart into a series of images, and then it's like, hey, remember that there's another foothold over here. There's also this interesting, I assume because this was using a Python tool, even though for some reason it's not showing it here, which is very disappointing because it was showing it on the phone. If I can't find it, absolutely working, I'll take a screen grab of the phone just so you can see it. It's really cool. It's because it's doing tool usage, and it's literally doing zoom and enhance. It's like blow up this section of the image and look at it more closely. So here you can see some of the texture and things like that on this hold and everything. And then it does this wild thing. It says, I think the crop coordinates were the best choice, but the general route should still be clear. So it's thinking to itself, it's like, oops, I made a mistake. I did all of this stuff. So then it breaks it down. It looks at another piece of the image, and then it says the start holds are tricky, which it is and it isn't. It's not that bad. So it says, anyway, let's focus on the conceptual route. And then of course you can see it begins to kind of sketch out how to do that. And then of course we get to the output. The climb is basically up and left rising traverse, which is correct. You pull out of the little cave on the right, surf the 2 long yellow banana rails across the gray panel. That's cool. I hadn't thought about surfing. And then step up the line of 4 round nubbins and finish on the lone yellow jug just under the TV. The crux is staying compressed on the steep first panel and keeping weight over your feet when you hit the slopey rails. Yes, that is correct. If we go all the way back up here and look at this, let me blow it up here. This is incredibly challenging because of the fact that we've got, the wall actually leans out. So you're kind of, all of your weight is on these guys, and they're relatively smooth. They don't have a lot of texture. And then your feet are kind of high so that you're tending to stand up, which pulls you off the wall. So anyway, it's got the correct analysis of how all this stuff works. And then of course we've got a sequence of moves, start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, crux entry. Interesting. The left hand bumps to the right end of the first long yellow banana rail, and the right hand matches the rail. Right foot hops to the second little one just to your left. That's interesting. So I think it's thinking it's going to be hands on the rail rather than feet on the rail. So it might be making a mistake here. Left hand to the purple gray lip rail. It's not in, just smear on the wall until you, okay. So it's kind of thinking its way through. So I think this beta is not the best beta in the world, but the cool part is it's able to interpret something physical that I did not think a large language model would be able to do. That's the important part of this. But anyway, it's got extra pointers. It said, good luck, enjoy the swingy start and the surf across the bananas. It seems to understand that you will be standing on those yellow rails. So I'm not exactly sure why it mentioned, I'd have to read this in more detail anyway. And that's not, again, the point of what I wanted to talk about here. So anyway, since I'm not getting the code to come out exactly the same as it was yesterday, I'll show you a couple of screen grabs from my phone. You can see how what it's doing is it's actually, again, like I said, it's cropping in the image and then zooming it, which is really, really interesting. And then it produced at one point, this was again from yesterday. It actually creates an SQL, I guess, a PG SQL. I'm not exactly sure what that stands for, but it's almost like ASCII art, which is basically telling you how you're supposed to move through this thing. So you can see here's the cube jug, which would have been up here, but basically it's created an image of the flow, right? You start at the jug down here, you move up to the corner cube, you go to the cube jug, you go to the rail sloper, you go to the bighorn. So it's actually creating this really intriguing sort of graphical information about how one would climb this thing. And then of course it goes down here to the move by move beta. So really fascinating how it breaks down the problem. And then again, to look at it this morning and to look at the different tools it used and how it varied in terms of the beta that it gave me. So all in all, while this is not the most expert climber in the world, it is a good climber. It understands the physical nature of what's going on here. I mean, at least to the level of doing next token prediction, and it's able to understand the basic physics of how one would climb a wall, which seems really remarkable for, something that doesn't have a body. A lot of our learning experience, as I've talked about many times on this channel, comes from our bodies. It comes from being embodied agents in the world. And it's just fascinating to see how this large multimodal model is able to understand the physics and embodiment of the world. That was the part that truly blew me away as I started to play around with this thing while I was at the gym yesterday. All right, that was my experience with O3 at the gym, at the climbing gym yesterday, asking this large multimodal model to do something very niche, to do something that's very, very embodied, that an abstract entity you wouldn't think would be able to do that. And I thought it did a fantastic job. Now, is this actually usable beta? I don't know. I would actually have to read it very, very closely. That wasn't really the point of what I was looking for. I wanted to break open its brain and see how it was thinking. And I was very, very impressed by the tool usage, by its analysis, by its understanding of the physical nature of what was going on, and its ability to come up with a reasonable solution. All of that stuff was pretty mind-blowing. And like I said in the introduction, it was the first time that I've really started to go okay, this is starting to feel like artificial general intelligence that can transition the gap from being a non-embodied agent into something that can interact with me as an embodied agent. And I think that's a big moment, even though it might not seem like that big a deal. And even though it's not perfect by any means, and you might say yeah, no big deal. I'm no, this is a big deal. This is important what we're seeing right here. The fact that GPT-o3 is able to bridge this gap between a non-embodied abstract agent and an embodied agent in the form of me is something that is very impressive and something I did not think would happen actually. I thought it would require robots to get to this point, embodied agents in the form of robots to get to this point. So I am amazingly impressed by this and a little bit blown away. Alrighty folks, that's what I got for you today. Let me know in the comments what you think about all of this and what other sort of sports or activities or things like that you or I could test against the latest frontier models like ChatGPT-o3, and we could see how they do in other types of activities like this. While you're down there, if you don't mind liking the video, that really does help other people find it. And if you want to see more of this kind of stuff and other ramblings about AI, etc., please consider subscribing for more of this kind of content, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.